Well, I have investigated a couple of methods of getting these blades back into the shutter for the diaphragm. First using my normal assembly jig, and that worked, but it wasn't exactly straightforward. But I thought I'd have a go at doing it a different way, and so I'm going to put the blades back in to the case this way. Now, I'll start here. I'll put that little bracket back in, that little thing that swings the settings ring backwards and forwards, and I'm just lining up my case where I had that mark scribed on it somewhere. There it is. Let's get that coupled up correctly. That ring should drop into place. And that little setting lever needs to drop down too. Where is it? Oh, there it is. That's better. So all I'm doing is making sure that this lever is coupled correctly into that slot. Now, I had a mark on the case here, which was where that upright was, roughly, and the blades were fully open in that position. And the diaphragm blades, I'm just going to stack them in. Now, we can start anywhere we like with this because it's all equally awkward. That's not where I want to be. I need to be around the other side. Remembering the diaphragm blades are on top of the next blade at one end and under the next blade at the other, which is what makes this an awkward task. That's 3 blades in. Drop the 4th blade in, and that needs to tuck under that blade at that end. Of course it doesn't want to, so we've got to encourage it. That's better. So I've got 4 blades in position. I need the 5th blade in position. It needs to be on top of this blade here and under the blade here. It's going under, and it's in the slot at the top here. I'll swing those blades around until they are roughly aligned with the outer diameter of that visible lens. That should work like that. Now, the retaining plate also had a mark on it. That fitted in there like that. Now, our pins, of course, are not lined up with the holes in our retaining plate at the moment, so I've got to nudge the blades in. I'm just gently, one at a time, They're just about in position now. I'm going to find a pin because there's a little hole in the middle of each of those rivets. I'll find a pin and use that to draw those blades into position. There's what I'm looking for. It's 2 just dropped in, 3, 4, that one's out, it's in. Right, I've got 5 of them in place now. The diaphragm is looking a normal shape. The tab up here is pointing where I had it pointed to start off with. If I fit my 2 screws in place, and the 2 screws go, one goes here beside that post. Of course you would have taken great note of where those screws went before you took it apart. I was supposed to, but I didn't. And one goes directly opposite that in the case. Where's that? Is it that one or that one? That one, I think. So, there's the blades. Do they move? Where's our lever? There it is. There you go. They're moving freely. So I can tighten my 2 screws up. And fit back the spring that operated that diaphragm, noting that it was a bit awkward to get off. It's going to be equally awkward to get back onto that lever, I would think. Yeah. Okay. Might take 2 pairs of tweezers, and you might need to turn the sound down if things don't go right. Okay, let's see if I can encourage this in here. Oh, that was nearly it. But nearly's not good enough. May have been better off to put that spring in place before I put the blades in place. This is certainly being a nuisance. I wonder if that can be done. I'm only going to do that if I really have to. I don't want to take it all apart again. Where did it go? Well, the spring hadn't gone very far. There, it's hooked on. Yeah, let's get that flipped over. And hooked over the post. Yeah, that spring sort of rubs up against the edge of the case there pretty much, so it's a bit reluctant to lie where I want it to lie. That's better. What I've got to do is stretch it out over to that post. Oh, I thought I had it there for a second and pressed it down far enough. Is that it? Is it sitting in its groove? It looks like it. So how does that lever work now? Yeah, that action's good. So I'm happy with the state of that diaphragm. That's very good. That's exactly what I wanted to achieve. And so I've got my shutter case here ready now. I'll check my two screws. Again, one's hiding under the spring of course. Yeah, good. That action's great. I can move my attention now to dealing with the mechanism plate. And the mechanism plate, I'm going to swab that with some naphtha. I'll do the top surface here first. That's of lesser importance. That little spring that you see sticking out here, that's the detent spring for this arm. Be careful with that spring. Don't catch anything on it. If it gets distorted, you can end up with trouble. And on the underside of the mechanism plate, this is more important. Now in this recess here, circular recess that the blade actuating ring runs in, that should be clean. Here I'm removing a lot of stuff. Most of that is graphite grease from the previous shutter service, or indeed even possibly from the original assembly. That's probably excessive. But we certainly don't need it there at the moment, so we'll get rid of all of that. And these other surfaces here, of course, the shutter blades run backwards and forwards across the top of some of this, so that all needs to be free from oil. You can see the dirt that's coming off there, so there's quite a bit of contamination of that was just me releasing the shutter, which hopefully won't cause me any grief. You can tell when as you clean these things, where you've removed all the oils, the black anodised surface in particular will look quite dull. It looks like a charcoal grey. And anywhere there's oil on it, it will be more glossy finish. So you can tell where you've been and where any problem areas might lie. The outside of the case here, in particular the thread at the top here, of course, is where the front retainer ring screws on in place. Now that was hard to remove, and I thought perhaps it had been cross-threaded. It doesn't look particularly like that's the case. And I don't think it was locked in place with a bit of paint or lacquer, which is a trick sometimes people might do. It certainly doesn't need anything to lock it in position. It has a retaining lug that goes in at the top that stops that ring from being able to loosen up over time. And the thread on the inside here needs to be cleaned too. Now this is where the front lens element actually screws in and out on this shutter. On most shutters you have a central lens element, or central lens group is often in its own mount with its own screw thread, and the lens screws into that. In this case it's using the body of the mechanism plate to screw in and out, and that's our adjustment for focus in that thread there, as the front element screws inwards or outwards. And this is quite greasy because that thread is normally lubricated so that the lens will move freely, but not too freely. So I'm cleaning out that thread, clean the outside thread, top surface has been cleaned, bottom surface has been cleaned. I need to clean the glass lens in the central element here. Now there's probably very little dust on a lens in this position because of course it's been inside the shutter, protected from the world, but quite often it's got a few greasy spots on it. It may even have a haze of oil. If there was a lot of oil in the shutter, you can often get a haze of oil droplets on that lens, which will affect your it'll affect the contrast of your images. That's nice and clean now. That was required very little work to clean that up. So I'll pop that to one side. I've got my blade actuating ring here. And basically I'm going to clean away all that old grease, and along with it any dust and other rubbish that the grease is currently holding. And when I put that back in place, I will lubricate that lightly, in this case with a bit of molybdenum paste. Very little is required in the way of lubrication for something like this, and you certainly don't want something that will become viscous over time. Otherwise it can effectively glue the ring into the recess, meaning that it doesn't move freely, or indeed at all in some cases. On a shutter where the lens was completely removed from the shutter while I was servicing it, I would frequently just lubricate a component like this with graphite powder after I have everything assembled and blow away any excess. But because the lenses are in place, I can't do that, because I would end up with graphite powder, little tiny dust of it on the glass surfaces. So, taking a little bit of molybdenum paste, I'll run it around the inside edge and the outside edge. Excuse me. Just give that front face a very little white. There's probably too much there. Molybdenum paste, you need very little. It's if you're leaving a dirty mark, that's probably about enough. Now this has to couple correctly to the arm here, so I've got to cock that shutter again because it had released it previously. That little arm needs to come across, and you see it here, that needs to come right across because it needs to catch this post here, and I can drop that into position. Is it going to go without a fight? No, it's thinking about it. Something's holding me up. No, it's in place. Okay. My 5 screws and washers. So we've got all of these here. Yes. And probably unusually for a Prontour type shutter, the washers are all exactly the same size and the screws are the same length. These screws are relatively long as Prontour shutter screws go in this position. Frequently they're just little stubby things, and frequently they're not particularly well machined and don't go in as nicely as you'd like. It's important that these screw heads do not become damaged. If the screw slots become damaged, the shutter blades may not pivot around them correctly. So normal good screwdriver techniques are required. Just make sure you have a decent screwdriver, you don't slip, and don't go mad doing the screws up either. If those screw heads get distorted, you can end up with a shutter that's a bit reluctant to move correctly, or one blade that seems to lag the others. All in place. I can tighten the screws up. And that blade, that actuating ring should move backwards and forwards when I release the shutter. And it does. Oh, and I can see I've got a good fingerprint on that lens too, so I better clean that while I'm here. I thought I was being careful too. That is the mechanism plate ready to take the shutter blades, and so the shutter blades need to be cleaned. Let's bring these over here. Now I'm just going to clean these with naphtha. There's a few marks on them, which I hope at the moment is just oil staining. Not corrosion. Now I'm busy doing my cleaning here on a dark grey paper serviette, and I use that instead of the normal white one just for the benefit of the video, because if I use the white one, the video camera says, oh look, this is pretty bright, immediately closes the aperture down to something stupid, and the shutter blades just look like matte black blobs, and you'll never see what I'm doing. In an ideal world I'd have a Kodak 18% grey, lint-free tissue that I could work on. Just looking at the state of that blade, there's a mark on the back edge of that blade, right there, like a notch. Just going to hold it up to the light, see if I can figure out what's going on there. There's certainly something on the edge of that blade. Does it clean away? Just poking at that with a toothpick. Yeah, there's a coincidence, I think. There was a little blob of something on there, stuck to the blade, right next to that notch. It made it look like the edge of the metal had been turned up, but that was not the case. It was just something stuck there. And something that didn't remove neatly with the naphtha and the cotton bud, but had to be prodded off the blade. These blades are fairly broad, as you can see. Now, the broader the blade is, it probably means that there's a greater overlap of the blades, and so a greater propensity to stick if there's any oil. Okay, well that looks good. Those blades can be put in place. So first of all, I want to cock the shutter, and then I want to move my blade actuating ring down to the open position, to the blade's open position, and I did that by disconnecting it from the arm on the main cam. Then I can put my shutter blades in place. Now, I handily marked my case 1 and 2, so I know where to start putting the blades in. Now, these shutter blades have got an extra hole in them. I don't know why they've got an extra hole in them. It doesn't seem to serve any useful purpose. It may be an artifact of manufacture. Why is that blade not sitting down neatly? It's not sitting down over the screw head neatly there. That's better. That was almost certainly caught up in that screw, the slot in the screw head that I mentioned can be a problem. Now, getting this one in place, this is the third blade. It sort of tucks down into a slot underneath this brass post sometimes. And yeah, in this case too. So you have to be careful getting that third blade in position. That fourth one went in position without any argument. That's good. It only leaves us with the final blade. That's good. Now I will check the state of the lens in here, make sure I've got no dust on it. Make sure there's no dust on that lens because I'm closing that up now.